Hey fam, welcome to the Freetrail podcast. Of course, I am your host, Dylan Bowman, one of the founders of Freetrail. A couple of things to get to before today's show. Please, you're watching here on YouTube, smash the subscribe button if you don't mind. We're going to slowly try and build this channel over time. So hit the subscribe button so you can be informed each and every time we drop a new video here. Also, please consider joining Freetrail Pro. There's a link in the description of today's YouTube podcast episode. Join the community. It's only $100 a year. Connect with an amazing group of diverse runners from around the world who you can connect with, learn from, and follow along as we all take part in this incredible sport. Finally, we have a lot of great sponsors on our show. The show would not exist without the sponsors. Please do take the time to go to the show notes, click through, find the discount codes, and next time you're in the market for any of the great trail running products, please do consider visiting and supporting the sponsors who support us. Tabor Hemming, welcome to the podcast. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Thanks for having me.
We were just laughing off air about the fact that we've been conspiring to do this podcast for a couple months now, and we've both been busy. We've both been traveling and up to various activities. And anyway, here we are finally making it happen.
Yeah, I'm excited that our paths and schedules finally aligned.
You were just in my neighborhood a few weeks ago for the Big Alta, which we're going to come around and talk about. But I have to start our conversation where I always do, Tabor, and that is with my traditional opening question, which is, what makes you? Please introduce yourself to the Freetrail audience by giving them a sense of what makes you special.
Yeah, well, what makes me me? That's a loaded question. What makes me is me, but I would say what makes me me are the people that I've surrounded myself with in my life, or the people that I haven't gotten a choice to be surrounded by, but have been integral, like my parents, for instance. Like, they've made me me. And then my brother, I have a younger sibling, and then also people that I've gotten to bring into my life. So like Eli, or my college coaches and teammates. And then people now that we've met in the trail running community and close friends, they've all impacted me in a way that makes me assess like the characteristics that I admire in people, and then also the ones that I recognize in myself that I'm like, okay, I could change those aspects and emulate people in a certain way. Like, I look at Eli and I'm like, wow, he has so much patience. I need more patience.
I look at my spouse that way too. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I definitely think the people that have surrounded me my whole life is what makes me who I am today.
See, this is why I love asking this question, because I think it just provides the perfect foundation for the rest of the conversation. Say a few more words about your family, your parents and your brother. In what ways have they shaped the person you've become now in your, I guess, mid-20s?
Yeah, so I think how my parents have shaped me especially is they are really unconventional. Like, they bucked the system from early on, and they like did things that people kept telling them weren't possible. For instance, we live in a town, or I grew up in a town of 1,500 people, and my parents decided, you know what, we're going to start a coffee shop in this town. And everyone was like, that is absolutely crazy. Like, you won't make it. And here they are. I'm 27, so 26 years later, and they still have the coffee shop, and it's like a thriving, awesome, happy business and like the hotspot of our town. And also, my dad at age 36 made the U.S. Olympic rowing team. And he didn't row in college. He just pulled a really good old erg score, and people like, you too old to do this. But he did it. Like, he made it happen. And so my mom is like the foundation of the coffee shop, and my dad's like the foundation of sport. And then together they like broke down barriers that people said like, you can't do it and it's unconventional. And they're like, nah, we're doing it. So that's how they've impacted me, of like, there's nothing that anyone can say that if, as long as you believe it and you're like, find joy in it, go for it. Like, why not?
So good. Tabor, I have to reveal something to you, and that is that
Yes.
I'm representing Shooter's Coffee right now. So to our listening audience, I just open my flannel to reveal the t-shirt that Tabor and Eli gifted to me at the Big Alta from Shooter's Coffee, which I didn't even realize was a family business until this point.
Yeah.
It's like
Yep.
a cool local spot in Kremmling. So here I
It
am
is.
presenting Shooter's Coffee here.
I love it. Next time we'll bring you a bag of coffee and that, like, then we'll just really get you hooked.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, we'll do a live podcast there one day. It'll be great.
Oh, there we go. My parents are putting on a gravel race in July. And so one day Eli and I want to be like, oh, we'll do like how Mid-South does, like the trail race one day and then the gravel race the next.
That's actually a very good idea. So say a few more
Right?
words about Kremmling. When Eli was on the show, we talked about it briefly, but it's your hometown. You guys live there again now. I'm somebody who's actually been there, just sort of like, driving between Summit County and Steamboat Springs, and it's well off the beaten track for people who are thinking about Colorado. Just kind of paint the picture of Kremmling and in what ways growing up there has sort of shaped the person you are.
Yeah, so it's not off the beaten path. It's actually the center of the universe. Thank you very much. No, no, but I don't know. My family, so I'm a 5th generation cattle rancher. And so my great grandpa got here in 1882. So we've been here a while. But yeah, and so my whole family has grown up here, lived here, and some people think it's like super remote and rural and like, how could you do it? And I understand that if you're sitting in town, you're looking out and you're like, wow, there's like nothing to do here. But as soon as you get out of the town, that's where like all the things are to do. Like for people that love outdoor recreation is what's like the best part about it. And I don't know, I love our lifestyle. Like my parents have made me leave. They said like, you have to leave to go to college to appreciate where you live. And then you can come back if you want to. And yeah, be a part of the ranch and the coffee shop and everything else that goes along with it.
So 5th generation cattle ranching, that feels like a really, I guess, kind of just interesting part of your personal history and family history, and probably something that you feel palpably, almost maybe biologically at this point. And I know that you and Eli live and work, I think, on the family ranch. So paint a picture of that for us. Like, what does that look like practically for the two of you?
Yeah, so that was one of the strong. So we were living in Louisville, 2022, and my grandma is now 88, and she lives by herself because my parents just live like right over the hill. Their house is like kind of adjacent to the ranch, but she was getting to the age that like it would be nice to have someone like there most of the time just to like help her with small things. But also then my dad, because my grandma is 88, he can't do it all by himself. Like he's almost 60, and that's a big handful to be like, okay, you're a one-man show. Good luck. And we were kind of at a crossroads in our life, and we're like, well, like I'm super passionate about ranching. Eli knows nothing about ranching, but we can teach him. Like it's not that mentally challenging. And so like what our day-to-day activities look like is it just really ebbs and flows with the seasons. So like in the winter, we don't have like a lot of chores. Like we go out and what we call cake the heifers and like, I don't know, plow snow. And there's not like a lot of hype in the winter. It's like the unglamorous time.
Interesting.
But coming up in like, it's March 5th. So like, I don't know, in 20 days, we start calving season. And that's when like my family really needs help. And that's when we calve over 200 cows. And so that'll look like checking calves. Like we check them all hours of the day, all hours of the night, in the morning. Like it just depends on what shift you get. So you might be the 9 p.m. crew and then the 11 p.m. crew or the 4:30 a.m. Like you just got to be on it because you don't want to lose any in the snow or the cold. Or sometimes they have like some birth complications. And so that's kind of the springtime. And then in the summer, it's all about growing the hay, cutting it, baling it, stacking it. Like that's a bit more labor intensive. But that's what it kind of looks like. Our day-to-day depends on the season. So no day is ever the same.
And that's how humans have evolved to live and work. I wondered if living in this way and coming back to those roots that your family has been pursuing for multiple generations now is,
Mhm.
I don't know, in some way touched you, like, or given you more perspective on the value of tangible physical work in an analog world at a time when everything's going digital. Anything you want to say about that?
Yeah, I think it just makes you appreciate when you spend time doing something and you can step away at the end of a day and you can feel really satisfied and fulfilled in a way that I just don't feel like stepping away from maybe a day of work on the computer feels the same way, if that makes sense. Like I
Oh,
feel both work is valuable, but it's just how one makes you feel at the end. And so I think that's what this type of work, you step away and you're like, you feel like you made a difference. I don't know in the big scheme of things if we're making a huge difference. And probably animal activists are probably like, no, you're doing the wrong things. But like we step away and hope we're making a difference in at least the cow's life.
yeah.
Yeah.
What about aligning your life in this way? In what ways has it created maybe a deeper closeness with your family or a feeling of a deeper connection with multiple generations of your family?
Yeah, I think one of the most important reasons that we came back is my grandpa passed away of dementia, but his like some of his final words to us is like he wanted to see the ranch live on and he wanted to see it like continue to be what he helped create it to be. And so just knowing that from him was a reason I was like, wow, I have to help my dad to see like those wishes come true because I would hate for it to land on my plate and be like, I heard those lasting words and then I don't contribute. So I think that in itself has made like us as a family closer, knowing that we have a collective goal of what someone asked of us. Um, yeah. And
Carrying on
so,
the family legacy and probably in
yeah.
some way feeling a responsibility to not break the chain, right? And keep the legacy going for the next generation. Well, it's really fun to talk about. And I think a really interesting part of your story, just being where you're from and living there again at the same time that you're pursuing this professional athletic career and doing so remarkably successfully.
Oh,
So before we
thanks.
go further back in time, which I'd also like to talk about a little bit, I wanted to first talk about the big transition that you guys announced around the turn of the year, signing with the Adidas TERREX team. I think it surprised a lot of people in the trail running world. I'm sure it was a really big decision that you guys had to make together. So can you give just the listeners a little bit of insight into that move and the contemplation that went into it?
Yeah, I think we are very thankful to Solomon first and foremost, like them being our first sponsor and like taking that risk on us because I think that's the hardest part about getting into trail running is like if you don't have any brands that have any interest, like no brand wants to be like, "Oh yeah, that's us, we'll take them." Like it's more like, "Ooh, someone should definitely gamble and see if this works out, and if it does, then we'll pick it up later."
Yeah.
So we're like super indebted to Solomon for taking that chance on us last year.
Mhm.
But we just found more of a connection with people on TERREX and kind of like their their push with the athletes and how they treat them and maybe the races that they're pursuing and for us the flexibility of races. Like I think what they're doing with Golden Trail is absolutely amazing. And I think it's all headed in the right direction. But Eli and I both left our respected professions in sport to not be tied to a certain series.
Mhm.
And like, we really like the diversity of trail that like there's so many races and they're so different. And so by going to TERREX, that was going to allow us to have like a bit more leverage to go in a lot of different ways and see what we liked. And I think Eli is really showing an example of that, of like, who would have thought Eli would have dabbled in a 60K and then, and who knows, maybe wanting to go longer there. And it just gives us that flexibility.
So cool. So a point of personal curiosity, did the
Hmm.
whole process there for you and for you both, I think, this being a very important moment in your careers, which maybe we can talk about here in a second. Did it feel like an exciting process or a stressful process to sort of make this big jump? Because you could see it from both directions and maybe there was a mix of emotions there.
Mm-hmm. I think we were really excited once January 1st hit. Prior to January 1st, it was very, very stressful because we didn't know what we were doing. And like, there's no guidelines of like, hey, so like, this is what you do. Like this, you're allowed to contact companies or you're not allowed to contact them. And like, this is the bargaining process. And like, this is what you're worth, but this is what athletes are going for. Like, and we don't have an agent. Like we do all this communicating by ourselves, which I think is good and bad. Like I think it's good for a brand to be like, I'm communicating with the athlete, like, and I know what they want. But at the same time, as the athlete, it's hard to like look at those numbers and be like, wow, that's how they value me as a person. And you're like, no, it's a business. So it's hard to be, it was very stressful because you're trying to balance this is what I need as a person and this is how I'm trying to connect with a company. But they're also like, yeah, but this is what a business does. So pairing those two, and that was stressful.
Did you guys entertain the idea of hiring an agent or some sort of management to help you through the process? Because you guys very much represent like the most elite crop of this new wave of pros. And like I said, this is a big moment. And for the listeners, if it's not obvious, these contracts come up every couple of years. In other words, you can't really screw it up. Or if you do screw it up, you can't amend or you can't fix that failure for a couple of years down the road. Talk about the decision to not engage an agent, and if there's anybody or people or network that you leverage to help yourselves feel armed with the appropriate resources to go into those negotiations. I'd love to hear.
Yeah, so we didn't personally know of any agents. I know they're out there. But we just didn't have any contacts. And so instead of finding an agent that we knew could possibly take anywhere from 5 to 15% of what you get for a contract, and like, I'm not sure if many people like know about trail running contracts, but I think they're quite a bit lower than any other sport contract. Like they're not like,
you should have been around when I was your age, Dave.
I know, right? Like we're complaining and people are like, we got travel budgets. Like this was awesome. And now we're like, we need like a retainer and we need a travel budget. And like, so I think like knowing that they would take quite a bit from it. And if you're already not being able to get a lot, you're kind of like, okay, well, I think I could risk it for the biscuit a little bit. Oh. So not wanting to pay someone else, we risk it for the biscuit. But that's not to say that we didn't have outside help from like close friends that know more of like the inner workings of how companies do things. And so that was super helpful just to know like what they look for in a resume, or like, okay, if they send over a contract, that isn't a final number. Like an athlete does still have the power if they're interested in you. Mm-hmm. Like, so, but you need to be able to come up with reasons why you're valuable. And I think a lot of athletes are like, well, look at my results. Exactly. I'm valuable.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, but what else can you offer a company? Like you can't just be like, okay, well, I did this. And you're like, well, what if you get injured? Or like, what if like COVID races are canceled for a whole year? Yeah. Like, how else are you a valuable stock to a company? And so I think a lot of athletes, I would say, need to know that 100%. Instead of being like, I race fast, sponsor me. You're like, okay, that's not a lot. Like a lot of people can race fast.
This is a big hobby horse of mine. I actually just had Justin Grunwald on the pod where we talked a little bit about agents and their role in the sport. And obviously it's becoming more and more of a conversation. So I appreciate you sharing a little bit about your guys' experience, and congratulations on the new step. It's going to be really exciting to see what you guys do with that awesome and growing TERREX group. Going back in time again, I'd love to hear about your experience racing collegiately. You know, you ran at the University of Colorado. I grew up in Boulder, I should say.
Go
One of the
Buffs.
Yeah, go Buffs, go Buffs. My mom actually worked at the university my entire
Oh,
childhood. So I was a big
wow.
Buff fan. And of course, it's one of the great programs in the country for collegiate running. How was your experience there at CU? Say a few words about what it meant to you to race for the University of Colorado and whether or not you enjoyed your experience.
Yeah, so I love CU. It was like, I would say, I wouldn't say it's the best 5 years of my life, but like it was the most formative 5 years of my life. I had like a lot of trials and tribulations in my running there. I don't think it was the program or the coaches. It was definitely a me issue. But I think that's where I grew the most as a runner, both in like confidence and just in knowing my capabilities. And they really fostered that. And it's where I fell in love with the process of it and learned how to do it for me and not like because my parents thought it was cool or because my brother was better than me. And I was like, I gotta beat you.
Mm.
So I really liked my time at CU just because it let me figure out that I liked running, not just like that my family was into it. And so I should be into it. Um, and yeah, Mark and Heather, the coaches there, like they stretched me as a person and an athlete. And I think that was really good for me.
What do you mean when you say about the me issues? What were you doing to sort of self-sabotage there? Because there's a running theme on the show, Tabor, about people who've raced at a high level like you did collegiately, who
Mhm.
had less than positive experiences. It sounds like overall yours was very positive, but would love to hear maybe some of the growth that came from whatever those me issues were.
Yeah, I think coming into college, there was a lot of like self pressure that I put on myself. And I did choose a program where I was the small fish in the big pond. And that's what I looked for in a program because coming from a small town like Kremmling, like I was always the big fish. Like I was the big fish in middle school, then in high school, like we were 2A, but even in the state of Colorado, like I was one of the big fishes. So I kind of wanted to find a program where I would sink a bit. But I think where the me problem came in college was putting all that pressure on it and it wasn't super fun for a little bit, and so I had to like go back and be like, okay, but what does it matter, like what does this change in your life if you don't do great? Like your parents still love you, like you still come back and you go to school and everyone that you sit in the seminar with could care less. Like the person that cares the most is you. And so that was like an issue. And then also, I think a lot of people deal with it, but just learning to fuel, like going into college, like no one teaches you, like, okay, so you're running 25 miles a week in high school, and then you go to a college program, and like the intensity ramps up, and school goes crazy, and you're a young adult trying to figure out, like, how do I cook for myself? And so I think that was like a huge learning experience that it was like, oh, well, I had a Pop Tart before practice. And it's like, okay, well, what else have you had today? And you're like, well, I had like a waffle before class. And you're like, okay, well, like, have you had any protein? You're like, no, I'm supposed to do that. So I think like learning, I think if I could go back to my younger self, I'd be like, so you should like have a balanced meal like every meal and you won't get injured and you'll be in a way better mood and school will be a lot easier.
Tell me about winning the national championship, which you did in cross country. Talk about that experience because I'm sure you look back at that as one of the highlights of your life.
Oh, that was like one of the best team experiences I've ever had in my life. And that's why I would say like cross country is such a team sport, but that's why I miss team sports. Like that was my only team sport I ever did. But but it was like we in college, Mark and Heather, if it was shitty weather, they didn't care. They're like, you're going out and we're doing the workouts and it doesn't matter because guess what? I bet your competitors are sleeping in. I bet they're going on the treadmill. So the morning that we woke up at nationals, it had snowed like 6 inches and we were running through like that much fresh snow. And I remember the coaches were like, okay, well, this is no problem. Like, you guys did this in practice like multiple times, so it's no issue. And so they
Anything
gave us
is an
such
advantage. Yeah.
yeah, it was an advantage. And so they put like this long of spikes in our shoes, and all of us just stood on the start line with such confidence that we could like do it. And everyone had the race of their life. Every girl, all of our top 7 had like races of their life. And you just would turn around, you're like, wait, there's another one of my teammates that just crossed the line, and there's another. And just like the happiness on every girl's face that no one had a bad day, I don't think you can replicate that very often. Where like the people that you worked hard with and then you get to celebrate hard with. I think there's always 1 or 2 people that are like, oh, I'm bummed about my day. But everyone was like, I had a baller day. Like, and that was special to be a part of. And I'll remember it forever.
And what a great story and what a great lesson. It reminds me of something that I heard on a podcast years ago about the Brownlee brothers and triathlon, who I think Eli
Yeah.
probably has some experience racing against, 2 great triathletes and brothers from the UK who are from some small town. I'm not sure which, but
Mhm.
it's sort of notorious for having shitty weather year round. And everybody just sort of makes the assumption that it's the terrible weather that's made them such tough competitors, because they
Yeah.
always go out in this like 36-degree sideways rain. And they
Oh,
go and compete in the Olympics in Rio and crush it. And everybody's like, well, yeah, they perform in the worst conditions all the time. So
yeah.
they're tough as nails. And
They
yeah,
do hard things.
hard things, right? And it toughens
Yeah.
up and it shows up when it matters most. What a great story. I know you also participated in the World Junior Mountain Running Championships, right? I think it was before you were in college.
Yeah.
How did that land on your radar? And now in retrospect or with hindsight, how do you think that's sort of influenced the career path you've been on?
You went in the archives for this. Yeah, I don't know if you know the name Ellen Miller by chance,
I don't.
but yeah, she's first of all an incredible woman. She summited Everest like 4 times or something, but she lives in Vail, and we've known her as a family friend for ages from Nordic skiing actually. And she's known me since my mom was skiing with me in the front pack. And she was like the head, she helped like do junior US mountain running. And I remember I was like at a trail race in Vail. It was like the Vail uphill race. It was awful.
Yeah.
Like my parents were like, we're going to sign up for this. My brother and I are like, okay, why? And my dad's like, you can win stuff. And we're like, okay. But she saw us doing it and she saw me run well. And I was like 15 at the time. And she's like, hey, I think like we have this opportunity that you could travel abroad and you could run. And I'm like, yeah, like sign me up. I want to do all those things. And so that's how that kind of happened, because that's all application based for the juniors, because it's really hard to get juniors like to Loon Mountain in New Hampshire and be like, you should race off. There'd be like 2 juniors there.
Yeah, right.
But that definitely opened my eyes to there was more to running than just the track world. But at the time, I didn't know like what capacity you could do that in. Like I saw the seniors, but at that time in my life, being like 15 or 16, I thought they were like ancient dinosaurs. I'm like, wow, you're like 40 and they're probably like 29.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm like, that's what you do after your track career. Like, okay, that's where I'll go for my retirement.
Yeah.
And then when I got to college, I was like, oh, no, those people are like not much older than I am now when they're doing that. So I think that just like put the tiny thought in my mind that there's something out there other than track and road running that you can like do and be really good at.
And it all makes perfect sense in hindsight. You mentioned Nordic skiing. This is also a running theme on the podcast that now you reminded me to bring into the conversation here today. I think you have at least some history with that sport. So tell us about your experience with Nordic skiing and maybe how it set up your running success.
Yeah, so I did Nordic skiing long before I ever did running. When I was 3 days old, my mom had me in a front pack and she was skiing and my dad was doing a ski race. And so, yeah, I was on skis by the time I was a year old. And I competed all through like JNQ, which is like junior Olympic racing. And that's what I thought I was going to go to college for, honestly. Like I was going to go to CU for skiing. And then I figured out how much roller skiing they have to do. And I'm not sure if you've seen roller skiing.
Of course, I know what roller skiing
okay.
is.
Yeah, it's like a dangerous sport. Like, I'm not super into it, but it's like a means to an end of racing well. So you're like, okay, I'll do it. But then at CU, I was kind of like, well, there's a lot of great places to run here, and there's not a lot of great places to roller ski here. So I think I'm going to roller ski. But no, all growing up, that's all we did. We Nordic raced growing up. My dad used to be a US Paralympic Nordic coach. And so I would say like that's the sport that my family was like the most into. So that was what gave me my aerobic engine for the lackluster amount of running that we ever did.
Say a few more words about your parents, because they seem like very interesting human beings. I guess you've already mentioned the fact that they, whatever you said, like they're unorthodox in their approach to life, but it seems like they're also competitive and active and have made it a point to expose both you and your brother to endurance sport from a young age.
Yeah. No, my parents are the best, and they're the ones who like got us into all of this, but they're very unconventional. They like made a point that they weren't going to put us in team sports, because not that team sports are bad. Like they did team sports growing up. Like my dad played college football for a little while, and like my mom, she did gymnastics, and like they did the whole gamut of it. But they were like, we want to do sports that we can go out and do it with you. So it's like a family activity.
Cool.
So like Nordic skiing when we were little, the like hydration belts that you put the bottle in the back, they found like the paracord that like you do like arm exercises with, and they would put one end on their hydration belt, then we would wear the other, and they would just tow us around skiing for like hours. And they did the same thing on bikes. They'd put it on the back of their seat post and on our top tube, and they'd pull us up climbs. So then they'd release it. We could all go downhill together. So they just made sure that like movement was something that we did together as a family.
Mm-hmm.
And so it really like made my brother and I experience it as a positive way, where I think a lot of parents are like, okay, you're going to go off and you're going to do this and we'll watch you and then we can talk about it later. It was like we all got to
or it's
experience it at the same time. Yeah, okay, but it was punishment a couple times. Like I don't want to be like, my brother and I loved it and it was rainbows and butterflies
like
all the time.
Negative 15 degrees in Kremmling. It's like, Mom, I don't want to go Nordic skiing. Come on.
They're like, it's not negative 25 yet. And you're like, but it's cold. No, I think my favorite story about my parents is our driveway is a mile long and it's all uphill. And if we hadn't done any physical activity in a day, like, I don't know, I view that my brother and I were probably angels of children. But my parents, I think, have a different story. And they're like, they were terrible. And if they didn't get out and exercise, they were just like hellions. So they would kick us out at the bottom of our road and they would say, you have to run home. And we'd be like, we don't want to. And we'd try and find like every excuse. Like if it was raining, we'd be like, we don't have a raincoat. And my mom would like pull out a raincoat from the back. Or we'd be like, we don't have any running shoes. My mom would like pull out running shoes from the back of the car. And we're like, where did this woman like get all this stuff?
That's motherhood. And they're always,
yeah. She just always had it. So that's like, we did have some moments where it was definitely like punishment of like, you need to get out. Or if like we had been fighting, they're like, you're getting out the car and running home. And then by the end, my brother and I were like best friends. We're like, this is awesome. We bonded. We were outside together. But yeah, my parents were just like super athletic. I think my dad, I thank him for his genetic genes. They are definitely what has gotten me to this point with a lot of hard work. But like he was, did football in college and then went on to do decathlon in college as well. And then was a professional cyclist for a little while. And then did, it was on the US Olympic rowing team for the last 8 years of her professional career. My mom has just always been like,
I got to have him on the podcast.
Oh, I would love this. I would love a combo podcast with my dad and I. It would be the most funny thing. He's just a fit Will Ferrell.
Okay, well, we're going to put that on the docket for some time in the future. Another thing that's just popping into my head that may be relevant, maybe not, but just coming back to the Nordic skiing for a bit. I know you've had experience and probably know Sophia Lockley and raced against her. And as somebody who has some perspective on this, maybe you can contextualize it a little bit for the audience. Obviously, she's racing at the highest level in both Nordic skiing and in trail running. Can you just like add any perspective on what that means or how difficult achieving something like that is?
Yeah, first of all, Sophia, incredible, and being able to balance two at the same time. Like she is an anomaly. Like it's amazing to see what she can do. Like from being on World Cup podiums to then like Sears and all. Like what? Like no one would think that's possible.
Yeah.
So I think what's really impressive for her is the specificity. Like running, what makes you good at running is running. But then also what makes you good at Nordic skiing is there's so much technique that goes into it. So you have to spend hours and hours getting proficient at the technique. So I think her being able to balance both of those things without overtraining or getting severely burned out, it's just very impressive to me. Yeah.
So interesting. Yeah. When we talked to her for the Trail Runner of the Year vote, that was one of the things that also boggled my mind is like how the volume at which she's racing in the wintertime and then bouncing back and racing the entire Golden Trail World Series and racing at a very high level, obviously, but also at a very high volume throughout the racing year. So incredible. All right. So coming back to you, you mentioned Sears and all. And when I had Eli on the podcast, we talked about this together. Your first experience, that is, at Switzerland's most iconic race, and you guys had the chance to experience it as a honeymoon. And I wanted to surface this conversation in your episode because it seemed like an important moment in your guys's not only athletic career but in your life together. So remind the audience about that trip to Sierras and all, and in what ways it sort of set you on this path that you've been on the last couple of years.
Yeah, so that was the year that we just kind of like were figuring out trail running. And honestly, we didn't even know what the Golden Trail was. And each race that we went to, people were like, oh, you go to this race next. And we're like, okay. And so like it all started with like we went to GoPro Games and someone says, oh, you got to go to Broken Arrow. And we're like, what's Broken Arrow? They're like, oh, it's this. We're like, okay. And then we're at Broken Arrow. And then people are like, oh, no. So you go and do the US Mountain Running Championships. And we're like, okay. Like, sure. When is it? And then someone else was like, oh, if you really want to like experience trail running, you go to Sears and all. And we're like, okay, like what state is that in? And they're like, no, it's in Switzerland.
It
And we're
sounds
like
Southern California. Yeah.
Yeah, we're like, oh, I bet it's just like an easy flight somewhere. Maybe we can drive there. Like, they're like, no, it's in Switzerland. We're like, oh, okay. So we like tabled the thought and we're like, that'll be fun one of these years. And we kind of then we like looked into like what the Golden Trail was, and we were watching some of the YouTube videos. We're like, oh, we're definitely not in that league yet. Like that's really cool, but I don't think we're in that league. But then like we did pretty well at the races that we had done in the US, and we're like, well, okay, maybe we can save up our money and in August we'll go to Sears and all and just see, like, let's see if we can get our teeth knocked in, and then we'll know where we are in the world. Like maybe we're really good, or maybe we're just like or maybe we're really bad. But the best way to find out is to find out. So we hadn't done a honeymoon, and so we're like, okay, we'll make it like an excuse. We'll be like, we're going on a honeymoon, but there's a race at the end. Like that seems fair, right? Well, we also thought you could just sign up for the race, right? Just like any other US race. We're like, we should just be able to sign up like 2 weeks before. That's how it works, right? No, like registration closes like in February for this. So I somehow acquired Greg Volay's email. I do not remember how I found it, but I think it was like I stalked him on LinkedIn or something. And I wrote this really amazing email because I'm a communication major. So I'm really good at writing emails. And I told him pretty much that we were this stupid American couple who had no idea that there was a registration deadline. And we promised we'll do well if he would just let us in. And he did. And he goes, but next time you need to register when you're allowed to register. So like thanked him, and then we went over there. And I don't know, I kind of think for me it's a perfect course because you have enough of a climb that it's not so long that you're gonna like get too far behind people. But at the same time, it gets people tired enough that if they don't have great lead turnover for that upper fast section, that like you can kind of eat them up.
Yep.
And so I don't know, on the uphill, I was getting passed like crazy. And so I had just been like, wow, I am shit at trail running. Like this is me. I'm actually not that good. And then I got up to the flatter section. Which Max Keen lied to me. I'd asked him like, when does the downhill start? And he goes, oh, it starts on this place called Weisshorn. I'm like, Tabor, just get to Weisshorn and it's all downhill. I tested him after. No, it's not all downhill from there. There are uphills after that. But I just started eating people up. And at one point I passed Sarah Alonso, and I'd watched the YouTube video and I was like, that's Sarah Alonso. I'm having the race of my life.
Yep.
So it went very quickly from I'm an awful trail runner to I'm passing Sarah Alonso, who she could have had a really bad day that day and I just didn't know it. But like I was like, I'm passing her.
Yeah.
So like I finished 10th, which then got upgraded because of the doping to 9th. And that kind of was the gateway to be like, oh, we could actually like be pretty good at this stuff. And it's worth our hard effort to like try some more.
And what I talked to Eli about, which you can add your perspective on too, is like, I don't know, what I love about that story is that you guys spent your own money to go create that opportunity for yourselves. And now here you are emerging into the upper echelon in the sport, now very well supported by a new sponsor. And maybe that wouldn't have happened if you hadn't have taken your own money and sent that cold email to Greg Valet and made that investment in your career. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, I think you got to invest in yourself. Like, I think so many people wait for others to invest in them. But if it really matters to you, like, I think you have to show that investment to yourself, and it'll mean so much more at the end of the day. Yeah. And then like the wins or the losses, like, I don't know, there's something to learn from it because you're like, but I did that. Yeah.
So another thing that I talked to Eli about when he was on the podcast was the extent to which your experience as sort of a more traditional track and cross country runner, somebody that comes from that sort of collegiate pedigree, had rubbed off on him. Of course, Eli's story is now well known, being a multi-sport athlete, triathlete, who's now a fantastic trail runner. So maybe turning that question around on you, like in what ways have you guys come together to establish some new, as we sort of start talking about your training and stuff, like if there's anything from his multi-sport background that has maybe influenced or inspired the way that you approach your own training, I think it'd be interesting to hear.
Yeah, I think what's bled over from him is I don't think runners are that fit. I just think they have really great running economy and they're good at cranking on a distance, like a pace and a distance really, really well. But I wouldn't say runners are fit people. Whereas like triathletes are very fit people. They put in a lot of hours, they put a lot of time at threshold. And so I think that's where we've kind of blended our training in ways of like, there does need to be a priority of structured running, but also there needs to be a priority of having hours be a part of that. And so like meshing the two where you're getting quality running in, but you're also getting quality hours in. Because before him, I was like bare minimum, like you only run, that's all you do. And that does make you a very good runner. But also, like, I don't think it's maybe greatest for longevity and like just even mentally mix some things up.
Say more about this good runner versus good athlete thing, because this is a novel thought, at least in what I can recall being brought up into the podcast. Do you mean sort of like triathletes are well-rounded and are more athletic, maybe they're stronger potentially from spending time in the water, and in general just have a little bit more athleticism?
Well, if that, but like power, like fatigue resistance, like you just go down the list of like, take for instance, a 1,500-meter runner. They do a workout, they are shelled for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
You have a swimmer, okay, he's going to do a hard swim. Then he's going to get out and do 90 to 2 hours on the bike. And then maybe he'll finish with a hard run, like track workout. Like he's building an aerobic engine that 1,500-meter runner, they do not have that.
Hmm.
They are really good at just running 4 minutes very hard. But like progress that any farther and you might see like a really big breakdown. So like looking at trails, there's no races that are 4 minutes. It'd be kind of cool maybe. But like there's no format. So I think like trail is a cool intersection where you have to be a good runner, but you also have to be a fit runner, because like the races are long enough that you can't just rely on running all by itself. Some people maybe can, but like I think the majority of people find like crossover super helpful.
That's really interesting, Tabor. Thanks for sharing a little bit about that. Like Eli, also your training's a bit of a mystery, so I'm going to ask you to reveal a little bit about it. You got
You found me on Strava.
Yeah. So you got a burner Strava account. I won't link it in the show notes here to not reveal any your secret identity on that platform. But I'm sure the listeners would love to hear whatever you care to reveal about what your training looks like, especially like maybe this time of year. And we can come back around to that here in a second. But in general, just sort of like the mix between volume and intensity, whether or not you have a coach, and just like what the day to day looks like in your training at this point.
Yeah. So Eli and I are currently self-coached, which is super fun. And we kind of like have each other to bounce ideas off of, but also rein each other in. So we really like that flexibility and also autonomy as people. And well, like how it looks like right now, to paint the scene, there's a lot of snow everywhere. Like last week, I got up and it was like -6 degrees to go for a skimo. And I was like, okay, you can do this. Like, put on your heated socks. You'll be fine. No dry roads, nothing. No track is clear. And so this time of year, we spend a lot of time doing a majority of our running on the treadmill. And, but when we run, we only run quality. And then when we're not running, we're Nordic skiing or we're ski mowing, which we just took up and we're not very good at it, but it's really fun and it's hard. And so I would say, like, if people, we've like average training, we try and hit like 20-hour weeks in the winter. And that'll evolve in the summer when we can run more and running volume.
How many of those 20 hours are running then? Because you said you're only doing it on the treadmill and it's only intensive.
I don't know. It's like 10 maybe. Yeah, about half. Yeah, we do some pretty long treadmill workouts
with intensity built in. I saw on your YouTube channel, which we'll talk about in a second, you guys have sort of dueling treadmills in your garage.
We do. We finally have 2 working Woodway treadmills, so now we can do them side by side. Because before we were like, okay, I'll get on at 6:30, and then you'll come out at 10, and then like, we'll like rotate around. But yeah, I think winter, like we supplement a lot of cross training, just because like I don't think anyone thinks treadmill running is fun. And if you do, I'm sorry, but like you need some help. But it's a tool. Like I think it's a great tool to be able to keep speed during the winter, because I think it would be a mistake to go 4 months without doing any speed training. And like we can't do that out on the roads. But we're also not doing any long runs this time of year, because we also aren't going to try and go run hard and fast outside and like hurt ourselves. And so we supplement like Nordic skiing or skimo, as that'll be our 3-hour effort like for the week. And that's how we pair it. And then as we move more into the summer, we'll like implement biking, but then be able to run on trails and then do more like road specific work. Throw a little track in there. So we just kind of like to keep it different, but also we like to periodize around the race that we're about to do.
Yeah. So that's what I was going to ask too, because, at least for the last couple of years, you guys have been racing frequently, at least between, call it May and October, with a lot of, a lot of frequency and in very competitive fields. And so that's why I asked about this time of year, like when you're looking ahead towards a racing season with so many competitions on the calendar, in what way do you think about the winter months? Is it about setting a foundation? Are you doing a lot of intensity? Is it more of like an aerobic base building time of year? That I think is something that would be really interesting to hear about.
Yeah. Winter is just all about like just getting time spent running, not super fast, but just at that threshold and getting comfortable there and just putting like a good amount of time running comfortably uncomfortable. So it's not too hard, but it's also not easy.
Yeah.
And then when we're racing this time of year too, we're just using it as like time to like just test out what we're doing, but also like they're all training races. Like we aren't dropping volume for any of them. Like for instance, at Big Alta, like I still did 2 workouts. I still averaged like 80 miles on that week. Like it was a big week, but we wanted to use those as training races. So then when it gets to like a race that we need to be like for qualifying or, a big bonus or something like that, that we've used that as a springboard. And so I think for a lot of people, we view winter as just our springboard. Like nothing should be super hard where you step off the treadmill and you're like, I'm going to puke. Like we never get there. Like that is not what this time of year is for. It's to get off the treadmill every time and be like, yeah, I could have done 5 more intervals there. Like that was good. And we do that too through like some lactate testing as well to make sure that we know that we're not overreaching. Yeah. And we do it all at 8,000 feet. So like our treadmills sit at 8,000. So we also make sure we do. Yeah. We have
a whole
enough
different ball
recovery.
game. Whole different ball game this day and age. And you guys are really leading us into a new generation. It's so exciting and interesting to talk about. Coming back to something you just said a second ago about your family and them, like you guys always shared that experience of movement together. And it seems like you and Eli have that too. I know you guys do at least a fair amount of your training together, if not side by side on the treadmill. You often get out and run together. Talk about that shared experience and sort of like being at a similar point in both of your careers. It's obviously a really exciting time for the both of you. And, to what extent you guys actually are out there on the trails together.
Yeah. So Eli and I do 100% of our training together.
100%.
100%. It's all together.
Wow.
Yeah, no, I know. It works. Somehow it works.
Wow.
Yeah, so like the only places that will differ is like speed of workouts. Like obviously he can not casually, but he can nicely run 5-minute pace. And I'm sorry, I like cannot nicely run 5-minute pace. But like before workouts, we'll do our warm-ups together and our cool downs together. And like easy days, we're always together for those. Like we're chatting, we're skiing next to each other. Like we just do it together. And it works for us. I don't know if it would work for everybody, but like we love to spend time with each other and we love each other. And yeah, I don't know. It's a special scenario that I'm super blessed that it like has worked the way it is because we are very introverted people. Like we're not super great at being social. And so the fact that we found each other to like train with has probably been like good and bad. Our parents are probably like, you should really like branch out, you guys. But yeah, we do 100% of our training together. And sometimes due to our physiologies, like our workouts will be slightly different, but like our cooldowns and warm-ups are never going to be different. Like
what a special thing. I mean, it's adorable, honestly. And, it's like going to work together. And my wife and I together too and spend the vast majority of every hour of the day in very
Yeah.
proximity. And it is special when you can make it work. So it's interesting to hear. It makes me also want to ask too, like, Katie Scheid and Germain Granger have both been
Mhm.
great athletes in the sport. They're a few years ahead of you and Eli, and they made the intentional decision to start doing different races. I think they just found that, as they were traveling the world and just sort of like exploding into this like, upper echelon in the sport, that it was
Yeah.
actually easier for them to target different opportunities, and probably they each have different skill sets and therefore giving themselves a better chance of success when they do compete. I wondered if that
Yeah.
resonated with you, if that's something that you guys had talked about between yourselves too, because oftentimes, like at the Big Alta, you're both racing, if not in the same race on the same race weekend.
Like I really think like racing separately probably has its benefits, like for some couples, and I commend those people. But like I think something that makes it special of why we'll probably keep doing the same races together is, again, when we cross that finish line, we can empathize with one another. We can be like, oh, could you believe that horrible muddy section? No. But like, I don't know, when we're out racing, we think about each other out there and we'll be like, okay, but like, how bad is the other person hurting? Or like, oh, I want to drop out. But then you're like, oh, well, what's Eli doing? Like, is he going to drop out? Which we have dropped out of a race together before. We did a ski race last year, and I come to the aid station, and I'm like, I am done. And then Eli comes around, and he comes to the aid station. I'm like, I'm done. He's like, I am so glad you're here. I'm gonna quit too. Yeah, but I also think like we both like to share those race feelings together as well. Like it's so easy to have like someone who's kind of like in the fight with you, like the morning of the race when like everyone's nervous and like you have the jitters, but like you feel like you're doing it with somebody. Back to like college, like you're all in the van, you're all getting ready for the meet, and you're all kind of like have those jitters, but you're like, okay, well, I did great in practice with you, so now like we can do great racing together. So I think we'll continue to race or show up to the same races. The distances might change, but yeah, he can have
Interesting.
the long stuff. I'm gonna stay like shorter.
All right, well, let's start talking about that. I want to talk specifically about your season. You guys started by heading down to Joshua Tree and taking on the Joshua Tree Traverse, an FKT that
Did
I once held in my career.
we watched your video before we did it?
Good. I'm glad you did. You're glad you
It was
did.
awesome.
I loved in your video about it that you said that you guys did it for the very relatable reason that you needed the extra United points before
We did.
the end of 2023. So anyway, I guess just like before we talk about, I want to talk about your half marathon a little bit too. I obviously want to talk about the Big Alta. So, just sort of like kicking off the season with a little bit of an FKT sort of time trial. Anything that you want to share with the audience about that experience?
Yeah. So we got winter in November, and by December we were already pretty over it. And then the United Miles came up, and Eli's like, I'm gonna lose my silver status if we don't take a flight. And I'm like, well, is there like a distance to this flight? And he's like, nope, it can be any flight. And we're like, well, we don't want to do a cross country flight again because we're over that. And so we just started we looked up a bunch of races, and like there was just nothing that was like really speaking to us. Then we started looking at FKTs, but then like so many are like, that's a hard time of year. Like December, like we were looking at like circumnavigation ones, whatever. And then we stumbled upon Joshua Tree, and we're like, oh, we could do that. And so we flew down there and we got to run in shorts, and we were originally going to do it separately. Like we were going to start at the same time, and then he was just going to see me at the finish when I got there. It was going to be like, we did it. And then I was really scared of getting lost. I'm really bad with like maps and GPX and like anything that involves like following a trail. And I looked up and saw there was a mixed gender, and I was like, we could run it together. And he's like, do you want me to run it with you? And I was like, would you?
You having nightmares of being abandoned in the middle of the desert, lost and out of water and dehydrated?
Yes, out of water, because they kept saying on the thing, like, there's no water. And I one of those people that Googles everything and like reads way too much into it. And like, I don't know, I could have gotten to Ryan Campground and asked some person for like some water and it would have been fine. And so he's like, yeah, I'll run it with you. And so we ran the whole thing together that day and got to experience the Joshua trees that felt like Dr. Seuss. And he got to experience me cramping and cussing and saying ultras are stupid. I'm never going to do them. And
yeah, was that the longest like run effort you've done in your life?
That's the longest I've ever ran in my life. Yeah, it felt very long.
And then you double back with a road half marathon. So maybe just say a couple words about that before we talk about the Big Alta. Because I don't know, it's like it feels, it's interesting, right? You know, or it's March 5th as we're recording this, or a week and a half out of the Big Alta. You've done a 37-mile FKT and then a 13-mile road half marathon and then a 17-mile 28K at the Big Alta. It's just an interesting way to start the year and shows your versatility. So say a few words about that 73-minute half marathon you clipped off there.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it was kind of a surprise, if I'm being honest. Well, TERREX was going to do like a little camp, and we're like, oh, we'll go down there. And then we saw there was the 60K part of Black Canyon. And I was like, I haven't done a lot of long efforts before. And so already doing like the 37-mile at Joshua Tree. And I don't know, because I am at a young age for long distance, I don't want to put too many in a year because I think that's like pretty greedy. Even if you like them and even if you're good at them, I think like it still takes a lot out of you. And I think Joshua Tree, like it was fun, but I still think at the end of the day, that did take a lot out of me physically. So I was like, I just won't race when we're down there. And then Danny Marino texted me like 2 weeks before, and she's like, hey, so they're doing the 60K or the 100K. Do you want to do a half marathon with me? And I was like, yeah, sure. Like, cool. I didn't realize it was a road half marathon. So I like go to the website and I'm like, oh, it's a road half marathon. Okay, I'll sign up for it. That's fine. So it was more just going to be something fun to do with a teammate to see like how training was going and like emphasizing that we are just doing a lot of threshold work right now on the treadmill. And so it was just an opportunity to see how it translated, like where's the speed at, and how like am I doing with running quickly and running it relaxed. And so it was just like a fun, hard effort. There wasn't a lot of thought put into it, honestly. Again, it was one of those weeks where like before the race, I'd run a lot already because Eli and I got super like enthralled with the trails around the Phoenix area. And every day we're like going out and running. And then we're like, do you want to go double? Like it was super fun to be out there. And like, I think Eli had like 120 miles at the end of that week with the 60K.
Wow. Gosh.
I did not have that many, but it was just one of those weeks that we got super giddy about like being able to run outside and on trails and with people. And so, there wasn't much thought going into the 73 other than half marathons really hurt. Like
probably gives, that's what I've heard. You know, I've never really time trialed at a half marathon, but I've heard it is like the ultimate torture of a distance because you're so on the throttle and it's just long enough to really make you suffer. But what a great validation of your early season fitness, which you then bounced back and proved once again at the Big Alta. So we were just so proud to have you at the race. And obviously both you and Eli had fantastic performances, and I hope it served as another great California vacation to escape the Kremmling winter. And I had the good fortune of running with you for, I don't know, 5 or 6 miles. So I don't know if there's anything you want to say about just like why you guys decided to come run the Big Alta and how you experienced it. And I also want to hear about your experience with Fernando too, because I don't know if
Oh
you
my God.
and what an icon he is in the local community.
So the reason that we wanted to come to Big Alta is because you were putting it on, and we think like it's super important to support inaugural grassroots races for people that we like believe in. Like, and I don't know, now that we've been there, we're like, wow, we will go there every year. That'll be like our preseason, like, let's go race. We've never been. Those trails were like stunning.
Thank
Like
you.
the views, oh my gosh. Like we had no idea. So yeah, I think the reason being was, again, like support you, get some fun running in, run with other people. And it was really nice to have, like you saw, I had my headphones on during the race.
Yeah.
Because I was like fully like, I don't know. I find myself a lot in races like in no man's land. And I'm like, I just ran like 16 miles by myself. Like, usually, not that there's not competition, it's usually I'm just like in this odd space between two people, and I'm like, well, so I put them on, and then I got to run with you, and I was like, I'm not gonna listen to anything, like I have somebody with me. And then I had Fernando, and I was like, I also, dude, you're a hype man, like, oh my gosh.
You never met Fernando before that, had you?
No, but I'm gonna hire him for every race hereafter.
I'm so excited for him to hear this because Fernando de Samaniego Steta is his name. He was our translator in the Aurelian Dunant Palaz podcast that we did for Trail Runner of the Year. He's a Mexican. He speaks like 5-6 different languages. He actually helped me translate a podcast with Jupiter from Black Canyon, also in Spanish a couple weeks ago, which we're going to be releasing at some point soon. And he's just genuinely one of the greatest human beings on planet Earth. And of course,
he was incredible.
Because of that, I recruited him. I said, hey, dude, I need you. I need you this weekend. I need you to chase the lead woman in the 28K for the last 9 miles. He's like, I got you, bro. I got you, bro. And then, of course, there's great videos of him, jumping in with you. And I'm sure he was a great hype man for that final climb up and over the top of Big Rock Ridge.
Oh, it was the best. And we saw Magda on course, and he was like, I paced her to second at Western States. And I'm like, yeah, I know why. Like, it all makes sense. If I ever decide to do Western, I am definitely wanting you there.
Well, thank you guys so much for coming. It was so great to have you here, and I appreciate the support and the kind words about the race. We were obviously very lucky with the weather and just how everything turned out, and we're still sort of on cloud 9 from the whole experience. I want to talk about your YouTube channel before we wind down, but before we get to that, I'm sure the listeners would love to hear about what you have planned for the rest of the season. Like I said, it's been a kind of unorthodox start, a FKT and then a half marathon, and then what you would think is a Tabor Hemming race, a 28K. What does the rest of the season look like for you? Because I Run Far published the UTMB start lists yesterday, and I saw Eli signed up for OCC, but I saw Tabor's name noticeably absent. So fill us in on what your goals are for the season.
Yeah, so both Eli and I's big goal is actually we're both doing OCC. And so that's like our big overarching goal for the year. We'd like to have like some pretty fun performances there, whatever that may look like come the time. But kind of building up to that, we're going to take March off of racing. We have a team camp that's over in Germany / Fuerteventura. So we're just going to have some fun time getting in training, get to know our teammates. And then we'll come back and we're both going to do Canyons 50K. We really enjoyed going to Way Too Cool a few years ago. And so knowing that that's like a similar type of course, we're going to go and rip some fast, fun 30 plus miles. And then as always, we love to do Broken Arrow. So we're back at that because that's like one of our favorite races to go to. And then, yeah, we kind of have an open calendar until OCC. So we're just kind of figuring out what we want to do. And then post OCC, the people will just have to wait. We don't know yet. Okay. It's a working calendar.
Well, man, I can't wait. We're going to be hanging out a bunch. The Big Alta, Freetrail is going to be at Canyons. Freetrail's, of course, going to be at Broken Arrow. And, obviously we'll be over at UTMB later in the summer. So it'll be great. We got to get I Run Far to update their article to put your name on there. I don't know.
I'll just be, I'm dark horse. I like no one knowing. I'm here for a good time. It's good.
All right. Well, so let's talk about your YouTube channel briefly before I let you go. And I appreciate you spending so much time. I think, this maybe comes back to something you said earlier when you were talking about, being a professional in the sport and wanting to, sort of build a platform for yourself and tell your story and probably at the end of the day, sort of provide value to your sponsors and stuff. Like I was telling you before we went live, I've been watching a lot of your guys's videos and love them. So just say a few words about that YouTube project and I'll make sure to link to your guys's channel in the show notes for our audience.
Well, I don't want to take very much credit for it because I am an actor in all of it, but Eli is the brains and he does all that editing all by himself. And he's on his computer for tired, many hours. And I'm always like, how's it going? And he's like, we missed a clip. And I'm like, oh, shoot, bud. I don't know how to help you. But we started it because we consume a lot of YouTube. It's a great learning resource. And you want to know about people. You want to see what they're doing or what makes them or maybe what their training is. And so we kind of wanted to do that for people that maybe no one's interested in us. I don't know. That could be totally high thinking. We only have 200 subscribers and I think a lot of them are my mom's friends. So it's fine. But if those people are interested, cool. We love them all. But it was just more of a place that we could share kind of our story and who we are and what we do and what makes us tick. And I think hopefully people respond to it, like it. I don't know. We're doing it because we have fun with it. And I think it's a good way to document life as well, that you can look back and you'd be like, oh, remember we did that? That was so stupid. Yeah, so it's an ever evolving process, but we just want to stay consistent and see where it takes us and maybe grows like a community. We don't have a huge community here in Kremmling, but if we can reach other people, I think isn't that the point of life? See how many people you can reach. And it's not just about you, but it's about the connections that you can make. And maybe at the end of the day, you change someone's course or the way they thought or their actions by something you did. So if maybe we can be that change for somebody, I don't know if we're doing it in the right way, but we're trying. Yeah.
No, I really think you are. And as somebody who also is a voracious consumer of these types of things, I think you have a very interesting story too, going through the journey together and sort of living in an obscure place and having a life that goes beyond just sport and being on the cattle ranch, which you haven't made a video about yet, but we'd love to.
It's coming. It's coming. It's clickbait.
But then, yeah, traveling the world and competing, as a unit, as you guys do, I think there's endless opportunity to build a great platform for yourself. Actually, there's a great analog in the triathlon space, which I'm sure you've seen that triathlon life with Eric Bergstrom and Paula Finlay. And anyway, I'd encourage you guys to keep doing it, and I would encourage our audience to go look it up. But we'll link to it in the show notes, and they can go smash the subscribe button and
thanks.
Keep abreast of your latest high quality production that I guess is Eli's.
All Eli. It's Studio Eli.
Cool. Well, Tabor, man, it's so great to have you on the show, and appreciate your patience in making this happen. Again, I close all these conversations with the traditional closing question as just, who is one person that you admire? Can be inside or outside of sports, living or dead, and why do you admire that person?
Yeah, there's been a lot of people that I've thought of, but I think the people that I admire the most are my parents. And I think it's because both of them, they really instilled in my brother and I to be ourselves. And you don't have to be accepted by anyone. You don't have to conform to everyone. but as long as you put your head down on your pillow at night and you're happy with who you are, that's what matters most. And I look at them and they do that. And like they've done that and they've fostered who my brother and I are. Like no matter how different we were from our peers or from other kids, and even now as adults, they're like our big supporters. And I just hope that I can be like that when I'm a parent. And like, I know that they probably think they have not done a perfect job, but to me, they gave me so many tools that I'm so thankful of. And so I just admire them for like doing the best that they did, and how they sent me out in the world. So I really admire them.
I love it. My father-in-law, my wife's dad, at our wedding gave a speech and said something to that effect. And that I recall his exact words were his focus as a father was to not interfere. And
Oh,
that was a critical piece in both my wife and her sister turning into these very mature, high achieving individuals is that, yeah, you just don't interfere and let them figure it out
yeah.
on their own, and encourage them to be their own person. It's a great way to
Yeah.
end an awesome conversation. Tabor Hemming, thanks for coming on the show. Look forward to seeing you at Canyons.
Thanks. Yeah. Thanks for having me.